everybody, and welcome to my program. My name is Kat, and many of you remember me from the Launchpad at Indian Trails Library. Well, I live in Northern California now, but through the magic of technology, I'm bringing you another program. So, today we are going to make these lovely bangle bracelets. Let's get started. Alright, these are the supplies we're going to be using today for the two techniques that I'm going to show you. The first is going to use tissue paper to cover the bangle, and the second is going to use thread. Now, let's talk a little bit about wooden bangle bracelets. I've got a few different styles here with me. You are going to be using this style and one that is about the same as this one here. Now, these used to be a lot easier to come by, and once we got started planning the program, I realized they were a little bit harder to find, especially because there's a lot of shipping delays with things right now. It can be harder to get products that you can't just go and get in the store. So we're a little limited, but we are still going to be able to learn the techniques. I do apologize, these ones are quite small on the inside, so if you have a smaller hand or wrist, these are going to work great for you. They might also be great if you have someone to give them to that is younger, teenager or child. These will fit better. Hopefully the other style works for you. Otherwise, like I said, you can learn the techniques and practice on these, and then you can go ahead and try to get some that fit you better somewhere else. We looked on Amazon. There were some issues with shipping delays. I believe we ended up getting these ones from Etsy, and I'm not sure where these ones came from, but off the top of my head, you can get them online if you have time to wait for the shipping. So we're going to be working with tissue paper and thread today, but you can also paint these. You can decorate with washi tape. There's all kinds of things you can do to these. They're just plain wooden bracelets, so really you can combine all kinds of different materials and do mixed media. They're very versatile. So we're just going to do a couple of techniques today, but hopefully it sparks your imagination to keep trying some other ones. I want to get started with the tissue paper project. So first I'm going to clear away the supplies for the thread bangles and just leave what I need for my tissue paper project. So we're going to be using Mod Podge. This is a matte Mod Podge. You probably have a small container of it that doesn't have the label on it anymore, so you can see it here. It's very recognizable. Matte is the finish that we're using because it's not going to be super sticky afterwards. You can see there's a little bit of shine to this, but mostly it's dull compared to a glossy finish Mod Podge. I like working with this finish because it seals everything in, but as I said, it's not going to be super sticky afterwards or overly shiny. It's just kind of a good one to have on hand. You also want to have a brush to brush this on. This dries kind of quickly and can gum up your brush, so you want to have a little bit of water. You don't need a lot. I just have this little cup of water. When you notice that your brush is starting to get a little too stiff, you can just kind of rest it in there, in between as you're cutting things out, or just dip it in there a little bit, dry it with a paper towel, and get back into your glue. You don't want this to get totally stiffened up on you. You want to be able to use your brush again. This does wash out, but if you leave it in too long, the base starts to get really gummed up, and it's really hard to get that out of there. And your brush is going to look a little bit different than mine. This is one that I already had, but you should have one in your supplies. You're also going to want a pair of scissors and your tissue paper. So what you're using is going to look a little different than mine because the tissue paper that I used on this example is actually old sewing pattern tissue. I have a lot of this and I really like reusing it for crafts because of the look of it. I like the patterns on it. I also just kind of like that style. It goes, you know, I like sewing and crafting, so I like having something that shows that. You can use any kind of tissue. The holidays are not too far away, so reusing that gift wrap tissue can be a fun holiday project. You could use any kind of holiday tissue from Easter or Valentine's Day or birthday or Christmas, whatever, and have a bangle bracelet for all different holidays. It's just a great way to reuse materials, and you don't need a lot to do it. Tissue paper is also really easy to find and comes in all kinds of different patterns. It's a great thing to use for decoupage, which is the technique that we're going to be doing today. You can cover more than just a bangle bracelet, actually. You could do other surfaces covered in tissue or a thin paper. It's, as I said, it's pretty easy to work with, but it is fragile, so you're going to want to be careful and not pull it too hard. I'm going to grab one of my blank bracelets here. And with these wooden bracelets, a lot of times you'll see, like this one has some filler because it had a little hole in it. But they did not fill in this part over here. That's okay. It's going to get covered up. And with tissue paper, it really shows the underside of it. You know, this is pretty transparent, so the wood will show through. I do like using this one because it's already the same kind of color as the wood, so it doesn't really matter that the wood is showing through. If you wanted to, you could paint this first with a layer of white paint or whatever color you want to show through and then cover over it. But I don't mind the wood showing through. You can also do several layers thick so that you don't see the wood underneath. I only did about 2 layers because, as I said, I didn't need to cover the wood color too much as it matched already. So it's really up to you. You're not going to need a ton of tissue, but you are going to want to cut it down into more usable pieces. So I already have some small pieces here from this pattern that's already been cut out, and I'm just going to cut them smaller. And you can kind of go with the contour of your bracelet. You want to have a little bit of extra to wrap around the edges, but small pieces work really well if you just cut out a couple inches and wrap it around. So I'm going to start by cutting a little strip here. And if there's a particular part of the pattern that you would like to have as a feature, then make sure you cut around that so that you can see it, and then be intentional about where you're going to place it. So before I even have any Mod Podge on here, I'm just going to kind of look and see as I go where I want to put my pieces. Alright, now that I have a few pieces cut out, I'm going to get started actually layering them onto here. So I'm going to shake up my glue here. And I'm just going to use it right out of the bottle here. And I'm just going to put a little bit where I'm starting. I don't want to cover the entire bracelet because it is going to get messy. And that is why we are working on a wax paper sheet here. This is going to help when this is drying. We'll be able to leave this on here and it won't stick to it. You really want to have a surface that it's not going to stick to as it dries. If you put it on newspaper or even tin foil, sometimes doesn't totally come off. Wax paper works great. So I'm just going to do a little area here, and I want to do a thin layer. You can see I don't have any large white clumps on here because I did a very smooth, thin application. So then I'm just going to take one of my small pieces here and lay it on top. And you will get wrinkles. It's up to you how particular you want to be about the wrinkles, if you want to really try to get those out, you can see on mine there are still wrinkles in here, and I don't think that it detracts from the look of it. And you don't have to cut your pieces out smooth like I'm doing. You can actually just rip them up so you have rough edges, and that will look really cool too. Alright, so I'm getting a little bit more on my brush, and I'm actually going to go over the top now. So the underside is wet and the top side is wet. And now I'm going to go and take care of my edges here. So I'm just going to put a little bit down on the actual bracelet where the overlap is going to go. And then I'm just going to use my brush to pull that over the edge. And then brush right over it. And I'm going to do the same on this side here. And then brush right over it. And then I'm going to go and kind of smooth down my edges. And you can use your finger for this. You are going to get a little bit messy. When you're working with Mod Podge, you get a little sticky, and that's okay. Don't be afraid of that. Alright, so I have my first piece placed down. And now, as I said, it's up to you if you want to try to be really particular about your design and follow a certain direction, or if you want to do it more haphazard, rip pieces up and kind of have more of a rough look. It's up to you. But you're just going to keep going around like I did with this piece and place your next pieces. So as you can see, I've added a few more pieces here, and I'm just going to keep repeating until I've gone all the way around the bracelet. For the inside, you can see that I haven't gone all the way overlapping. I've just gone over the edges a little bit. So then for this, I'm going to cut a piece that's just slightly smaller, and this one is not quite cut to the right size. And you can kind of do this on a dry spot to see. But you're going to want to cut it so it doesn't overlap, and then you can place it over the pieces that have come over your edges, and then the whole thing will end up being covered. And that's what I did in here. And you can see because of the pattern that's on this, it's kind of hard to tell where the pieces are cut, but everything, all of the area is covered, and I don't have anything coming over to disrupt the outside design on my piece. This is easier if you have something that is patterned. You could do it with a solid piece of tissue, and then you'll get some overlapping tones depending on how many layers you do. And like I said, you can just rip the pieces up if you want to. You could do really neat little tiny squares and overlap them. It's really up to you, but just keep repeating until you've covered the entire thing with one layer. Once you have it covered in one whole layer, you're going to just let this sit. If you want, you can wait a couple hours. You can leave it overnight. As long as when you come back to it, it's not tacky anymore, then you can start on your next layer. So once you've let that sit and you've done as many layers as you want to do, you can go over the whole thing with one last thin coat to seal everything in and let that dry, and then you're ready to wear it. This is really nice. It's going to have a great smooth finish and be a really unique piece. And as I said, you can do this for all different holidays. They're great to give as gifts. You could reuse the tissue paper that someone gave you on a gift and then give that back to them as a little thank you. It's really up to you how you do this, but it's as simple as that. We've already finished our first technique. Alright, I've cleared away all of the supplies from my tissue paper bangle and set them aside to dry while I get started on my thread bangle. So this is another one where you can take the technique that I'm showing you and do it in your own way. You have two different colors of thread. You don't have to use them both at the same time. That's how I got this striped technique. You could do one thread at a time. It is going to take you longer if you do one thread. You can also do the entire bracelet. I chose to leave little spaces where the wood shows through because I thought it would look kind of cool. But it is up to you. You can do it however you want. You could do smaller sections. You could do the whole thing. It's up to you. This is a more time-consuming one than the tissue paper, in my opinion. I think the tissue paper goes pretty fast for me, but if you do lots of fiber arts like knitting or crocheting, this might come faster to you. We'll see. Alright. So, as you can see, the back of my bracelet looks different than the front of it because I'm doing a technique where I wrap and tie a knot. So I'm ending up with this little ridge along it right here. You don't have to do that. You could just wrap it continuously, but you can't really stop once you've started wrapping it without the knots. You can't really set it down and walk away because it can unravel. So by doing these little knots as you go, you're going to be able to do a few inches or however much you have time for, set it down, walk away, do something else, and it's not going to move. So it's really up to you. You can also use the Mod Podge from our first technique if you wanted to cover a little bit of space with the Mod Podge and wrap the thread around and hold on to it, let that dry, and then keep doing Mod Podge as you go. You could do it that way. But I'm just going to do this simple technique with the thread and tying it in little knots because I like being able to have a portable craft. I could take this outside with me. I don't have to set anything up. It's just really easy to take on the go. So I will let you decide how you want to proceed, but I'm going to show you how I did mine. First, you need to find the ends of your thread and match them up. For this, we're going to leave them in their original shape and just continue to pull thread out as we need it. It's a little harder to measure this out. You're going to need quite a bit of thread to cover this, and you may need more thread or less thread than I used, depending on how hard you're pulling and how tightly you're packing the threads together. If you have more of a loose finish on yours, you're going to use less thread than I do. If you have more of a tight pull, then you're going to use more. And by leaving it in its packaging like this, you don't have to worry about measuring, you don't have to worry about them tangling up. It's going to be a lot easier to work with. So first, now that I have these two ends matched, I'm going to tie a little knot on my bracelet. I'm going to pull a little bit more out. And I'm just going to go around. And I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail and pull that tight. And then I'm going to do it again so that I have extra strong knot. And I'm placing my knot on the inside edge. And that's how I'm ending up with this little ridge right here. Alright, so that knot is going to stay there, and that tail is going to stay there until I get back around. If you're doing the entire bracelet in thread, you can lay this down and overlap it when you come back, and then it won't show. But if you're doing two different sections like I did, then you're going to want to just clip this tail off. I used a tiny bit of Mod Podge to cover this knot so that it wouldn't come out, and then I just clipped it really close to the knot and left it on there. You can kind of see the little knots right there. Okay, now that I have my knot, I'm going to start weaving my thread. You don't want to have too much excess because it's going to be a lot more to pull through and keep from getting tangled, but you want to have enough that it's easy to move around. You're just going to hold your two pieces together and bring them up through the middle of your bracelet. With my other hand, I'm holding this in a loop so that I can bring these two pieces back through it. And this is how I'm going to be making a little knot. And you can see that my tail keeps wanting to get in the way, and this is the point where I can decide if I want to weave it underneath or if I want to hold it out of the way to just clip it off later. I'm just going to hold it over here because I don't want to worry about it right now. You also, once you get to this point where I haven't pulled it very tightly, I want to pay attention to the order of my thread colors. If you want to have a clean striped pattern where it's alternating every single time, you're going to have to be very picky about how these threads are falling. Right now, if I straighten it out like that, I have red, pink, red, pink. You don't have to be particular about that. You can just kind of keep going around and let it be more haphazard. It will still look striped. It just won't be a super uniform stripe like this is. And I will say it's going to take you more time if you're going to try to be particular about the way the stripes are falling. And it's going to come out much cleaner on one side than it is on the other because of making these little knots. So now I've just pulled it tightly and I've lined up my knot with my first knot, and I'm going to do this again. Try to do this slowly so I can show you again. Up through the middle and then through this loop. And I'm going to slowly pull this. And when it's about here, I'm going to check and see how my thread is sitting. Smooth it out. And then just gently pull it and make sure that my knot is lined up. And you can see this side is very uniform and this side is a little bit more twisted. Now I'm just going to keep going around the whole thing until I get back to the end, and then I can finish it off. Now that would take some time, so I'm not going to go all the way around. I'm just going to do a few more so that you can kind of get the idea. Alright, so I've gone a little bit further, and you can see that my line is not super straight. I wasn't being very careful, and that the knots are not lining up anymore. So you do need to watch out for that. You can kind of go back. If you haven't gone too far yet, you can kind of go and straighten it out with your fingernail. Just pull that up so that it's a little bit straighter. And this is just gonna look a little bit different because it's a thicker knot. So then you're just gonna keep going around and around and around until you get back to the end or wherever you want to finish it off. And as I said, you could work on this a little bit, set it down, come back to it, take it with you. This is not a lot to carry around. You could easily keep this in a bag, take it with you, work on it when you're at the park or you're in the car waiting to pick somebody up. It's just really easy to take around with you because it doesn't take up much space. So, as I said, I used a tiny bit of Mod Podge. I just took a little toothpick, dipped it in the Mod Podge, and then covered over that knot. Let it dry, and then clip this really close to your knot. Or, I didn't really go over it from the beginning, but if I was going to, I would hold this down, and then when I pull these through to make my knot, I'm just going to hold that down, and that would cover over it and hold it in place. And you could do that until you get to the end. You could clip this a little bit shorter so that you don't have as much to cover. It's up to you. There's a lot of ways to finish this. If you don't like the way it looks having these little knots, like I said, you could just go around without them. So let's see what that looks like. Alright, I'm going to leave the part that I've already done, and I'm just going to go over starting with just a wrap to show you what that looks like. So for this, you're still going to go through the middle, and you're still going to slide these over close together. And it's going to be a lot easier to keep those two threads in line. But you're just going to want to use your fingers on your opposite hand to keep them lined up as you go. The downside of this technique is that you can't take it with you as easily. If I was to let go of this and put this in a bag, you can see this is just going to loosen up. So you could make one little knot with the technique that I showed you. And leave that in your bag or wherever you have it, and those aren't going to come apart. And then when you come back to finish it, you just untie that knot and keep going around. That would be a really easy way to do it. It's up to you. If you want to have that little inside layer of knots, you can. You don't have to. You also don't have to keep them all in line. You could use that as a pattern that goes through your whole piece. If you keep changing just slightly every time, you can have this little ridge of knots actually wrap around and create a pattern in your bracelet. I'm giving you a lot of options, and I know sometimes people don't like to have a lot of options, but it's really about making this your own expression. If it's for you or for a gift, you want to make this look the way you want it to look, and there's all kinds of different techniques that you can use. So I hope that you like this one, and we'll try some variations. But that's it. You're just going to go all the way around and then cut those knots, make sure they're all secure, and you've got another bracelet to wear. For these two techniques, we did provide you with the supplies, and they are supplies you could just go out and buy at the store. but I was also trying to keep in mind items that people who do crafts might already have in their house. Chances are you probably have a few of these colors lying around from past projects, and you probably have tissue paper around the house. These are things that it would be easy to just pick up and put onto something. These are the one thing you probably don't have lying around the house. But as I said, if you are willing to wait and order them online, you can get a big group of these and then use whatever supplies you have to make them your own. So there we have it. 2 different bracelets with very simple techniques that you can modify to make them your own. Alright, that is all I have for you today. I hope it was easier than you thought it was going to be, and maybe you learned something new. If you pre-registered for this program and received a packet of supplies, you will also have my contact information to reach out if you have any questions. I would love to hear from you and maybe see some photos of the projects that you made. It's so much fun to be back doing projects with you, and I hope to be back for more in the future. Bye for now.